Alright guys, welcome back to another one. So we've just received an absolute bombshell on the Bloodborne remake situation. But furthermore, I guess a proper explanation of sorts as to why we haven't received anything more to do with Bloodborne, whether it is a remake or a remaster, or potentially a sequel, within the past 10 years of the game first releasing in 2015. It's always been speculated that Sony are the true gatekeepers behind anything more happening with Bloodborne, and to a certain degree, this fact still absolutely remains. Japan Studio and From Software were the developers of the game, but as we know, Sony are the IP holders for Bloodborne. Ultimately, they get to decide what happens with this IP. In my previous video, I was talking about an insane claim that came out a few days ago that was reported by Detective Seeds, or also known as Green Zone Bytes, claiming that this person had talked to 4 ex-Bluepoint employees, where he was provided a timeline of what Bluepoint had been working on or pitched between the years of 2021 to 2025. Within this report, it was claimed that a few months after finishing up the Demon's Souls remake, Bluepoint then shifted to work on a Bloodborne remake to pitch to Sony in the hopes that it would get greenlit. This was in 2021. Unfortunately, this ended up getting scrapped, and Bluepoint shifted to work on a God of War title. In 2025, last year, it's claimed once again that Bluepoint ended up pitching the idea of a Bloodborne remake to Sony. Not only that, but they apparently also pitched a Jak and Daxter and Resistance remake, along with an extended version of the Shadow of the Colossus remake for PlayStation 5 with new content. All of these pitches were apparently denied by Sony, and rather, the team started to work on a Ghost of Tsushima spin-off. Now, as I was saying in my previous video, this is an insane claim only because of how specific it is, but to get 4 people to break NDA is incredibly unlikely. Of course, almost everyone that's seen this claim or this report coming from Detective Seeds has remained incredibly skeptical about it. Up until today. Bloomberg recently released a report, Jason Schreier, confirming that Bluepoint did in fact last year pitch a Bloodborne remake. Not only that, but Sony truly did reject a Shadow of the Colossus PlayStation 5 version and a Ghost of Tsushima spin-off. So this does actually validate some of what has been said within Detective Seeds or Green Zone Bytes report about Bluepoint. It doesn't necessarily mean that absolutely everything here is fact, as again, referring back to what Nate the Hate said about this report, some of this is actually real, but there is some stuff here that doesn't actually align. But it is actually Detective Seeds' report that broke this information first, before Bloomberg came in today to confirm it. And I want to quickly mention that doing some further research into the information that Detective Seeds has shared about this entire situation is the reason why at least one of the remakes that were pitched by Bluepoint to PlayStation were denied was because one of those is actually in development by a different studio. To explain the exact quote here, it's mentioned one of them said 2 of these projects were remakes they wanted to take on, but PlayStation did not believe they would be successful in the market. Both were apparently single-player experiences. I did ask if I could have the names of the projects. Both said no, and the reason is that at least one of the pitched projects is now being worked on by another studio. So this could possibly mean that either Jak and Daxter or Resistance may actually be getting a remake. However, swinging back to the Bloodborne situation, the reason why this Bloomberg report is insane is because of one piece of information that Jason reported here, mentioning in early 2025 when Bluepoint again pitched the idea of Bloodborne Remake, the studio was told that the numbers made sense, but From Software didn't want it to happen, according to people familiar with the process. Essentially, PlayStation were keen to make a Bloodborne remake happen, but upon asking From Software if they could have their blessing, they turned around and said no. This is genuinely crazy, only because we've always thought that it's just Sony simply not wanting to do anything more with Bloodborne. So even though PlayStation are 100% the IP owners of Bloodborne, they can do whatever the hell they want with this game, because they couldn't get From Software's blessing, they decided not to greenlight this. This is sort of crazy because it kind of changes how we approach thinking about why we haven't received anything to do with Bloodborne since it came out a decade ago. Collectively, everyone has always been quick to point fingers at Sony and thrash them for not receiving either a remaster or just anything more to do with Bloodborne. But in this case right here, if we're specifically looking at a remake of Bloodborne, so not a remaster, not a sequel, but a remake, this is something that clearly From Software don't want to happen. And this actually directly aligns up with Shuei Yoshida's comment about the Bloodborne situation and why PlayStation refused to do anything more with the game. He deemed this comment as being a theory and speculation, and that he didn't really know anything, but I think he was actually quite clued on. I mean, after all, this guy was the PlayStation president at one point. He said here, so I think he is interested, talking about Miyazaki, but he is also so successful and he is so busy, so he cannot do it himself. But he doesn't want anyone else to touch it, so that's my theory. And the PlayStation team respects his wish. He believed that basically without Miyazaki being on board and having the blessing from Software themselves, PlayStation wouldn't go ahead and do anything more with the Bloodborne IP. This is interesting though, because in the past, Miyazaki has mentioned that he's absolutely on board for a re-release of Bloodborne, more along the lines of a simple remaster, just taking the same game, applying some quality of life improvements, obviously getting finally 60 frames per second and a resolution increase, along with finally bringing the game to PC. This is something that Miyazaki is absolutely open to, but for PlayStation, it seems as if they want to do something a little bit more in depth for Bloodborne, like a full-scale remake. And based on the Bloomberg report here, this is something that From Software, and most likely Miyazaki, are not interested in. In my opinion, I do say fair enough, and I actually say good on PlayStation for respecting Miyazaki's wishes, because obviously if PlayStation were to go against From Software and create something more to do with Bloodborne, without FromSoft actually being keen on that idea, obviously then it would fragment the relationship between FromSoft and PlayStation. And I think this is ultimately why PlayStation haven't gone ahead and done anything more with Bloodborne without permission from FromSoft. Most people also agree that Bloodborne is one of Miyazaki's magnum opuses. It's a title that he's incredibly proud and fond of. In a way, this is one of his babies, so I don't blame him for being protective over it. Personally, I just don't think anyone would want anything more to do with Bloodborne unless Miyazaki was in some shape or form involved in the project. But I have to admit, I do find it incredibly surprising that Sony would actually respect From Software's wishes here, because if even a simple remaster of this game were to release, it would sell like hotcakes. So at the very least, this actually shows some integrity here from PlayStation. The fact that without From Software being on board, they're not willing to do anything more with Bloodborne. I'm not trying to take away what they did to Bluepoint though, because that's just a shit situation. I really don't think there's any excuse on this rock that can really give a good explanation as to why they ultimately decided to close down this studio. And I feel awful for everyone that was working there that has now lost their job. So the only hope here is that sometime in the future, when FromSoft aren't incredibly busy, drowning in projects, that they get a little bit of spare time, where PlayStation actually urge some of the team to come over to the studio and assist with either doing a remaster or a remake or a sequel, so that we can finally receive more to do with this universe. But unless Sony just agree to doing a simple remaster and not touching too much of the original game, it seems like it's going to be an incredibly long time before we receive anything more to do with Bloodborne. If we ever receive anything more to do with Bloodborne. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Be sure to slippity slap that like button. It helps me out more than you know, and subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. A big shout out to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll chat again real soon.